Hey Shoreline, Pastor Dave again, here to give you the second of two updates on the Green Street property that we're pursuing. Last week we talked about the pros and the cons that you noticed at the property, and this week we're going to be talking about the questions that you had about the building and questions about what ministry might look like at this property. The first big question has to do with the condition of the building. It likely needs a full interior renovation, and we believe that there is a high likelihood that there's mold, lead paint, and asbestos insulation in the building. We're not sure exactly how extensive that is, and so it's not clear at this moment how much volunteer labor we would be allowed to use in the process, because each of those requires a special abatement process. Further, the structure, it's hard for us to analyze that. So the structure itself, the foundation and the walls, the granite that goes from the foundation all the way to the roof would need an inspection by a qualified mason. Which leads us to a second question about the cost of renovations. That's difficult for us to project without having inspections and estimates given by certified professionals. But our best guess is that the total project cost, including the purchase price and the renovation, will put us somewhere in the ballpark of a $1 million project, which is roughly half of what we were projecting for the Quaker Hill property. This Sunday, you'll hear a presentation from the Deacons of Finance to give a snapshot of our financial position as a congregation and what this would look like for our church budget. The third major category of questions that the congregation raised about the property has to do with the size of the building. Is it the right size for our congregation? This building is smaller than some of the other properties we've looked at, though it was purpose-built as a house of worship, so it serves our needs rather efficiently. We're not retrofitting it and trying to accommodate a structure that wasn't designed for this purpose to suit our needs. What you're seeing here, and thank you to Hannah Bull for putting this together for us, is the basement and first level of the west side of the building. North is up in this diagram, and these two are stacked on top of each other. There's the basement, and the first level sits directly above it. What you're seeing here is the basement level. The basement is completely open except for that kitchen and utility room in the back. But what you're seeing here is a projection of how we might use it as a multi-purpose space with movable walls. The main area could be wide open for us to use as a large gathering space, or cordoned off to have classrooms for something like Shoreline kids to work with. On the main level, the entrance is underneath that grade section. The grade section at the bottom here is a mezzanine and overlooks the main level, and that's where you enter. Underneath that is the entrance to the building. And you can see here that we have chairs sort of lined up to see how much we can fit, depending on how we stack the chairs, whether there's any gap in between them. We can fit somewhere between 200 and 230 seats in the auditorium. And because we like to have space in between each other, right? When you sit down at Shoreline, you normally leave a gap in between you and your nearest neighbor there. Typically, the rule of thumb is that a room feels full at about 80% capacity. And so that 200 to 230 seat window is probably a congregation size of about 160 to 180. This is not the full building. Just so that if you've not been to this building before, there to the right here on the east side is a secondary space that has a few extra rooms on the first floor and then on the second floor as well. Another set of questions raised by your feedback forms has to do with the safety of the property. And really that's a question about the location more so than it is a question about the building itself. And that kind of broke down into two kind of categories of questions about safety. The first had to do with traffic, and the second had to do more with the neighborhood itself. Some raised concern that the traffic, you're crossing a two-lane road to get from the public parking across the street to the building itself. And I would encourage you to this Sunday and next, as we're considering the property, to drive past the building, both as you come to the Holiday Inn and as you leave, so that you see what it's like to find yourself crossing that street at the times we would be there most frequently, and also to check out the parking. For both, if you're inclined towards this property, if you're inclined away from this property, it's a really good thing for you to see what that area is like traffic-wise and parking-wise at the times that we would be using it most often. And with respect to the safety of the surrounding neighborhood, those who voiced that concern consistently said in their feedback forms that I don't personally feel unsafe, but I'm worried that others may. And so it looks like what we have is a congregation that's appropriately concerned for other people, not just our own preferences, but that most of us don't actually view the location as problematically unsafe. We move now from questions about the building to questions about Shoreline's ministry and what it would look like in this building. The first major question that was raised had to do with Shoreline Kids. Our philosophy about Shoreline Kids, or about children in general, is to have them participate in the full gathered worship of the congregation as much as they are able. Right now, Shoreline serves children up to second grade, and we know that some children make a good transition into participating in the sermon as well as they transition to third grade, but some might be served better by going up to third or fourth grade, but certainly by middle school. Shoreline, middle schoolers are learning, algebra. And so they can certainly participate in the sermon. And so our philosophy is that Shoreline Kids may grow to serve slightly older children, but not older than third or fourth grade, perhaps. And as that happens, we don't anticipate that Shoreline Kids will actually grow in the number of children that it serves. Right now, we have something like 90% of all of Shoreline's children are under the age of 8. And so almost everybody is part of that program. But as our children grow, many of them are going to age out of it. It's very unlikely, even if Shoreline as a congregation grows in size, it would be unlikely for our children to remain in that clustered in that age range. And so even as the congregation grows, Lord willing, it's very unlikely that we'll see the number of children that Shoreline Kids serves to grow very significantly. And if you serve in Shoreline Kids, what you've probably noticed is that our square footage isn't our biggest need right now. Some of our classrooms are, the spaces that we have to serve our kids are actually quite large for the number of students that we have. But what we need is a better use of that square footage. Right now, we can't divide the classrooms in the Holiday Inn better than we have them. But if we had our own space, we could effectively carve them up to better serve our classes. Beyond Shoreline Kids, what other kinds of ministry would we do here? Well, the central works of the church, no matter where we're located, are worship and discipleship and evangelism. And if you've been at Shoreline long, you've probably heard us kind of categorize that as proclaim and build and serve. And in the proclamation of the gospel, we will continue gathering for worship, for preaching, for prayer, and the public reading of the scriptures. And that's been a focal point of our ministry. And I think we would probably, in a place of our own, wherever that is, expand that with also periodic gatherings for prayer and worship, kind of a worship night or a prayer service. And then some downtown outreaches to things like Sailfest and more, perhaps engaging with the arts community downtown. With respect to building disciples, we would have the opportunity for community groups to meet at the building. We would have opportunities to easily set up discipleship events and workshops, maybe on a Saturday morning, things along those lines. Sunday school would be easier for us. We do it already, but it would be probably easier in our own space to set up and come and go as we want. With respect to serving, we've been talking about leading Shoreline in the past to move into sort of teaching a man to fish ministry. I think there are a lot of churches in the downtown New London area that do a good job of the giving a man a fish ministry, and that's a very good thing. It's not something that we want to dismiss at all, but I think teaching a man to fish kind of ministry is a really good fit for our strengths as a congregation and sort of our personality, so to speak, as a congregation. And so that provides new avenues that the giving a man a fish kind of ministry doesn't allow, building relationships. We can integrate the gospel into the actual service itself. If we do an ESL program, English as a second language, for instance, you need content to talk about, and that could be Jesus. Or a literacy ministry needs something to read. And the elders see this as a really good fit for this property would be a good fit for these kinds of ministries, since it's near the communities that are more likely to benefit most from them. The Quaker Hill property wasn't very close to lots of people who needed English as a second language, for instance. And so that just the people who lived in that neighborhood, that wasn't their biggest need. And so if we do want to go down this road of service, this kind of property, a property located in a neighborhood like this, would be a very helpful one. I asked the Southern Baptist Convention to put together a demographic study for us, just the 1 mile radius around this location. There are nearly 4,000 people for whom English is not their first language. And so an ESL ministry would work really well, perhaps, in a location like this. And so we put together a sort of week in the life projection for what it would look like for a week of ministry at this particular location. Now, this actually wouldn't look very different probably in other locations if we so chose them. But this is a snapshot of what it might look like, and it's going to be hard for you to read it on this screen. So the email that comes with this is going to send you a link to see all of these details. And again, this isn't something that is set in stone or anything of that nature. It's just a projection of what ministry at this place might look like throughout the week. Another question raised on the evaluation forms has to do with the building's proximity to other churches. Is this building too close to other churches? And the answer to that question is sort of a mixed one. Certainly we are closer to other churches than maybe would be ideal, but we have shown also that we've been able to faithfully gather and minister together for 7 years already in downtown New London, just a few blocks from this property. Historically, New London developed like most of the New England hub cities, lots of churches centrally located. So this does fit the history of the region. And each of the downtown congregations in downtown New London is quite different in terms of its personality and its practice. So Shoreline wouldn't necessarily be stepping on toes by making this move, though it could be perceived as such. And so it is a real concern as we continue evaluating the property. Another very valid question brought up by the evaluations is, are we outsiders? Most of our congregation lives outside the neighborhoods near this property. Will that negatively impact our ministry? Are we sort of, the saviors coming into downtown? If that's the way we come into this, then that would be a big problem. Churches can tarnish the reputation of the gospel if they come in thinking that they have all the answers for a community, that we are the saviors that they need. But Shoreline, I don't think that would be our approach. We would come worshiping a king and not pretending to be that king, and inviting others to worship him with us. And the kinds of ministry that we would hope to do to serve the community are not things that we just give them all the answers, but that we offer them things that we can help them with, like ESL or literacy or something like that. And the hope is that as we serve the community in that way, that part of the surrounding neighborhood becomes acquainted with the gospel and becomes acquainted with our church body, and so that we're not actually outsiders, but that many of the neighborhood become part of this congregation, and that shapes and changes the makeup, the attitude, the culture of our church family. The last major question raised in the evaluations had again to do with the size of the building. What if we outgrow it? Now, we don't want to presume upon the Lord how our congregation will grow in the future, but as this structure is slightly smaller than some of the others that we would have been looking at, it's a good question for us to ask because it is a potential outcome here. Luckily, there are a number of good options that we would have if we outgrow this place. The first and most obvious and perhaps best is to plant another church, to send some of our own out in gladness to establish new works of God in southeastern Connecticut, or to send them out to help another church, perhaps Huntington Street Baptist Church, with their revitalization efforts, to help them with their critical mass and more hands for the ministry there. Additionally, we could engage Shoreline Kids for the full duration of Sunday worship so that additional seats in the main worship space are freed up by children and the ministry and volunteers who would then be engaged in Shoreline Kids for the whole worship service. Additionally, we could plant ourselves out of the building. Like if we grew into this space and found a desire for us to minister in other places or in different ways, we could either entrust the building to another gospel preaching church and move to that other location, or we could essentially plant a new church here and move our church there. There are options that we have. It would be difficult for us, and I think that there are some theological issues associated with adding a second worship service. What does the word church mean? I think it means gathering, but many churches have found in a pinch, while they work towards better gathering spaces, a bigger space or something along those lines, adding a second worship service is a possibility. So what's next as we continue through the process? Well, please continue to pray. Pray for the congregation that we would act in wisdom. Members, pray for yourselves that you would vote with wisdom. And please pray for the elders and the deacons as we seek to lead the congregation well and faithfully through this process. And if a question that you have has not been answered in either of these two updates, please send it in. Let us know. Hit reply to the email that this link came to you with so that we can prep a good answer for you. And then please plan to attend the family meeting this Sunday, the 22nd, after gathered worship. There will be pizza, lunch provided, and we will have the financial presentation. There will be a time for questions and answers. There will be a time where you can actually share your impressions to the broader congregation. And then please plan the following Sunday, the 29th, to vote and on our direction as we decide which way to go as a congregation. And so thank you, friends, for listening into this update, and I pray that the Lord would guide our steps to his glory.